Great to be here with everybody. So, um, where is, yeah, Shiva's going to hand out some, a suggested topic list to each of you, and you can noodle this during the discussion tonight. And I am going to cover a lot of stuff tonight, but not everything as deeply as possible, right? So I'm going to kind of cover a number of different topics. I mean, just look at the flyer. Those of you who saw the flyer, um, consciousness, inner peace, what does it say? Past lives, soul plans. Any one of those topics could be a seminar in and of themselves, right? We're going to touch on those topics today. And the point of this list that Fortune put together is for you to give feedback to us during and after the talk tonight to see if there's anything on that list, or you can add anything that's not on the list that you want me to come back and talk more about. So there you go. Okay. So feel free to make notes on that. Plus, we put my contact info at the end of it, you'll see. So we'll want you to hand that in at the end, but you got plenty of time to write down my cell phone number, which I don't give out to everybody publicly. So special group here. You have my cell phone number, and you want to text me questions or whatever, or anybody who lives nearby wants to go for a walk with me, that's a possibility too. I walk here. I live right over here, by the way. I literally live across the water there, in the over on Tahiti Way. Um, yeah, so that's what I wanted to say, just in terms of that, the initial. So we've got the recording going. Yep, all set. Thank you so much. So before we get started, and this is going to be kind of fairly informal discussion. My whole thing, and those of you there's a few of you who've taken some of my classes here already, so you know how I am. I'm a needs-based person. Those of you know about sales and marketing, consultative selling. I come out of the sales and marketing industry and legal. I went to law school and was a lawyer. I practiced for a little while, practiced for overnight, I say. And then I worked in law firms helping manage firms and bringing in new clients. But so those of you who have any sales or marketing experience know what needs-based consultative selling is. So my whole thing is, what do you guys want to talk about? That's the bottom line. That's, as a teacher, that's what's important to me, right? So we're going to cover a bunch of different topics here. I'm not going to talk the whole night, and I'm going to leave a whole bunch of time at the end, at least an hour at the end, for you guys to just ask questions about anything that relates to anything we're talking about tonight. So anything means anything. You can go wherever, okay? So that's just kind of an overview of kind of where we're going tonight. As I said, we may have, Orchin and I have talked about doing some follow-ups to this where we may go deeper into some of the topics, but I'm just going to kind of do an overview this evening, okay? So first, just to give me a sense of who's here, how many of you have read any of my books? Anybody? Or started to read any of the books? Yeah, a few people. Okay. So, or maybe you've seen my websites. Uh, those of you who've seen my website or read any of my books, you know that my place mentally in my approach to you, my students, I consider you all my potential students, is to respect where you're at. And that means your belief system, where you're at in terms of understanding, et cetera, et cetera. I am not here to try to change people's beliefs about anything that we're going to talk about tonight. Now, obviously, I have a set of beliefs, and my beliefs are based on what? They're based on my personal experiences that I've accrued over this lifetime. And for those of you who know anything about this book, this book about my past lives, you know that my past life memories go back 6,000 years. So I've been paying attention as much as humanly possible, which is not perfect. None of us are. And but I've been learning, and I've been learning and perceiving and drawing certain inferences and understandings about stuff called life, right? For 6,000 years. So that's what my beliefs are based on. But I respect each of your own belief systems. And I want to ask you about that in a second. But each person has their own belief system, and you need to, I tell my students that they need to honor that for themselves, because last I just checked, self-development has that word self in it, right? And self-develop means your own self-development. And so nobody's controlling that other than you. And so that's how we learn, right? Step by step in our own way, at our own pace. Yeah, I have clients in 70 countries now, so all different cultures and religions and so forth. So I always ask people, like, what is their belief, first. So how many people here, for example, we go down this belief line of thinking for a second. How many people here think that after they die, that's it? That's it. The science belief about that's my father's belief system. And anybody who's read this book, you know a whole bunch of stories about my dad from reading this book, Overcoming the Fear of Death, right? So that's the science belief. And I have lots of people that come to me sometimes who they have the science belief. They believe that's it. No, no continuation of any consciousness, mind, mental experience, no nothing after the physical biological body died. That's it. That's one belief system. And so in this book, we're going to kind of just do a quick overview of some of my three books. But in this book, it talks about, the subtitle is through each of the four main belief systems. So my friend George and I were talking about this, and we said, how can we talk about this in a non-religious, non-cultural way about people's beliefs? And so we came up with these four beliefs that underlie and support all the religious and cultural beliefs out there. Why? So that people could talk to each other more openly without feeling like you're stepping on somebody's toes, their belief toes, right? So the first belief is the science belief, like I just said. The second belief I call the fear of continued existence. So that's where the person then does believe that something continues mentally, consciousness wise. You could call it mind, body, spirit, mind, spirit, consciousness, awareness, whatever, after the body biologically dies. But there's fear of continued existence. That's the second belief. Third belief I call just looking forward to the afterlife, basically. It's like they don't have a fear. They may be even looking forward to it. They just want, looking forward to going to heaven or nirvana or whatever, depending on which culture you're talking about. They have different labels for it, okay? The afterlife is what I call it. Fourth belief system that exists out there, past lives, reincarnation, belief that you can continue, if you want to, come back in a different biological body and have another lifetime, different lifetime, okay? Those are basically the four fundamental beliefs, the way I think about them anyway. And sometimes people are hybrids. They might be fence sitters. I'm not sure. Maybe this one, maybe that one. That's okay, right? So those are the four belief systems that I help people look through their lens and think more clearly about what their belief is. I'm not, as I said, trying to change their belief. I'm trying to help them think more clearly about what they do believe, and does it make sense or not. Since we're talking about that, overcoming the fear of death issue, anybody here have a fear of death? Just curious. Anybody afraid of dying, or what happens afterwards? Yeah, Chase, yeah. Or might have a related fear, like, how am I going to die? That's a related fear. It's not exactly, it's not exactly the same as what's going to happen after I die. It's what's going to happen before I die and how am I going to die? It's sometimes called the fear of pain and suffering, right? So I think there's a whole bunch of different fears that fall under that kind of umbrella, really. And part of what I do is help people identify what their actual fear is, because sometimes people think, oh, I'm just afraid of dying, afraid of death. But they haven't parsed it out and figured out exactly where they fit in that spectrum. Because the solution will be different depending on what the fear is. Okay. Um, just a couple other general questions. How many people here already meditate? We're going to talk a little bit about meditation. That's great. A lot of people here meditate. And how many people here are interested in learning about meditation because maybe you don't meditate already? Yeah. Yeah. So a number of people. Good. So we'll talk about that. Anybody have any past life experiences? Yeah. Some people? Yeah, several people. Yeah. That's great. That's interesting. Again, I'm just kind of get a sense for who the audience here. Anybody had a near-death experience? Yeah? Whoa, interesting. Yeah. And maybe in the end part, the Q&A, if anybody wants to share, can feel free, you know. I find it helpful for people to hear other people's experiences sometimes so that they know that they're not losing their mind by themselves, you know. Uh, we're all in it together. And I know when I first had some of my experiences, you'll see it. I'm very open and candid in my books about how I felt about it when it was happening. You know, I thought this was pretty strange, some of the experiences that I had. One last question for the audience before I kind of launch into our discussion tonight. How many people here would characterize yourself as thinkers? Like thinking about concepts and ideas. Yeah, that's great. That's most of the people here. So, like, for example, like, why are we here? That question, that big question, right? Uh, so there's a number of fellow philosophers here. It's nice to see. Nice to be in a group of fellow philosophers. Philosophers, by the way, when I use that word, I think of it as thinking about ideas and concepts. I don't think of it as sitting in some ivory tower, ruminating about stuff. I'm a very practical, you can tell one of my personality traits that we talk about in the second half of this book, the Past Life book, is about personality traits. And that's one of my one of my top personality traits. So top meaning one of the ones that comes out first and foremost in everything with me is, is what's the practical view of that? Is it useful? Can it help me, in my life? So let's just start out with a kind of a brief history of who I am, because most of you don't know me. So my meditation history started when I was a teenager. And I was telling somebody before the talk this evening that I was not into spiritual stuff at all. And she said, you were into meditation and you didn't realize that it was spiritual at all. I said, no, I didn't. I learned to meditate solely because I was really stressed out. I was in my second year of college and I thought I was going to flunk out. My first semester, I thought I was fried. I thought I was toast. This is it. And I was really, really anxious. And that's why I learned to meditate. And so so you guys can see me, I shaved my head, right? And this is because of male pattern baldness. This is a look, okay? Thank you, Michael Jordan. Anyway, but back then I had a full head of hair. My hair was down to here and I was parted in the middle. My hair was down to my shoulders. So I say that because I would go to some of these, Indian guru lectures, they're talking about meditation. And, the Hare Krishnas, they shave their hair. I'm not shaving my head, my hair is down to here. I like my hair. So I kind of screened out certain groups I don't want to badmouth any groups, but it was just not where I was at. You know, I was 18, 19 years old. And so I walked into an auditorium at my college, and there was a guy sitting up there on the stage, and he looked like a regular person to me. He didn't, you know, no beads, he didn't wear no orange robes, and he didn't shave his head, and he had a suit and tie on it. And a young guy, and he started talking about. So I was pre-med at the time. Okay, I didn't eventually go that whole route. But I knew what cortisol was. I knew my fight or flight was just through the crazy roof, right? And that's why I was so wigged out. And so he started talking about that. He started talking about how meditation can help with that. And there was an experiment that was being done by a Harvard Medical School professor down in Boston. Little did I know that about 8 months later, I was going to be a subject in that experiment. So I signed up and I learned TM, Transcendental Meditation, at the time. And I studied a year later personally with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and a couple of years later after that, I became a TM teacher. So he's the guy, if you don't know who he is, he's the guy who came out of India. He taught the Beatles to meditate, George Harrison first, et cetera, and then the rest of the Beatles and so forth. So I was an international leader in his organization for about 10 years. And then they kind of went off and started doing other things, and I left in the late 1970s. But I give Maharishi full credit for being the guy who said meditation can and should be easy. No concentration, no clearing the mind of thoughts. You should not be forcing. You shouldn't be focusing on the breath. You shouldn't be none of that. It should be an easy process. And I've removed since I left the organization, I've removed the cultural trappings from it, and I've made it even easier. 10 to 15 minutes each time, twice a day. That's what I teach my students now. And I've increased the consistency in some of the teaching principles and so forth since I've changed it to what I call turning within meditation is what I call it I teach now. But I've taught 5, 6, 7,000 people. Taught the first meditation courses in the history of the U.S. Army, and at West Point Military Academy, taught 200 or 300 people there, first several courses and so forth. So, but it's something that should be easy. I've thought about meditation for a long time now. And I thought, like, why are there so many meditation techniques out there that involve controlling the mind or the breath or the body or something? Why are they using control mechanisms when they know that we're trying to turn on an automatic switch in the nervous system? The opposite of the fight or flight is the parasympathetic switch in the nervous system. And that's an automatic switch, you could say, in our biological nervous system. You could also say just in our consciousness. It's an automatic switch. Does it make logical sense, I asked myself, does it make logical sense to turn on an automatic switch by controlling to turn it on? That makes no sense, right? And yet, nobody seems to have thought that through, and yet so many techniques involve controlling and manipulating the mind in order to try to turn on something that's inherent within us and it's automatic. All right. So that's a little kind of glimpse into how I view meditation. We can talk more about that if you want to in the Q&A. So when I got into, or what got me into helping people with fear of death issues and grief and sadness over loss of loved ones, was the death of my mother. And my mother died very young, in her 50s, and she had very advanced cancer. Like, she died pretty much overnight. And I was my third year of law school, and that's what kind of catapulted me into thinking about death in a really personalized way, right? I mean, I had some, my grandparent, one of my grandparents, a couple of my grandparents, uncle died, so forth. Was different. I was very close to my mom. Those of you who read my first book, you can read stories and you can tell how close I was to my mom. So that's what got me into helping people with death and dying. And I did it for free, nights and weekends. And I did it because it helped me to talk about it. And I just learned on the street, really, just meaning what worked, what worked when I talked to somebody and it made them feel better. And then they said something to me and it made me feel better. So later, many decades later, I got certified as a grief counselor and I took all these workshops and stuff, but I already knew everything because I'd already been practicing it for 30, 40 years just from my own experience. And that's what catapulted me into writing this book my first book on overcoming the fear of death. In my mid 30s, my after death communications, those of you who know, I just learned this acronym. The spiritual community is all into all kinds of acronyms. If you hadn't noticed, it's like the Army, ADCs, after death communications. So I just called them experiences. I started getting experiences communicating with the other side in my mid 30s. And you got to understand that, again, like I said earlier, I learned to meditate not for spiritual reasons. All this stuff started happening to me spontaneously, completely out of the blue. I come from a more scientific kind of background, the way I think about things in terms of rational and logical and so forth. And yet, in the mid 1980s, I just started getting these experiences from the other side. And then in my mid 30s, that was my mid 30s. In my mid 20s, so 10 years earlier than that, as I already mentioned, that's when my past life memories opened up. And we can talk about that a little bit at some point. So we talked a little bit about this book already. This book, 4 belief systems and so forth. There's a lot of stories in here, and most of the stories are not about me. I did not want to make this book about me. So I have a lot of stories from my clients and friends and relatives and so forth about how they've dealt with these and looked through their lens of the 4 different belief systems. And there's a lot of stories in here in that third belief system. Remember, the third belief system is no fear and believes in an afterlife. So in that chapter, there's a lot of stories in there about communicating with the other side and visitations and signs from the other side and all the different kinds of ways our loved ones and friends and beings on the other side can give us signs and so forth. That's covered in that book. This is my second book, Marcus Aurelius Updated. Has anybody here read this book or read part of it yet? Anybody? A couple people, few people. Yeah. So this is a book, it's a collection of 67 essays that I've written over the last 10, 12, 15 years. And my friend George said, hey, why don't you just publish all those essays? I said, well, that's a good idea. Because I'd already written them over the years and I just had to organize them. So, but why do I call it Marcus Aurelius Updated? Well, those of you who know anything about my background, I'll just hit the nail right on the head for you without teasing you. So I remember being Marcus Aurelius in the 2nd century, one of the most well-known Stoic philosophers, although he was not, he didn't start Stoicism and so forth, but probably because he also happened to be a Roman emperor at the time, and he did not want to be a Roman emperor. He wanted to be a philosopher. There's all kinds of stories about that, and I share some of those stories in this book, the After the Afterlife book, some of those stories. But that's why this title is the title. And I don't say this anywhere in this book because this book came out before my past life memories book. So, but now you know. So these are 67 essays on chapter, for example, there's a chapter on emotions, chapter on life principles, there's a chapter on meditation, and a chapter on the spiritual. And so I talk about things like success and happiness, several essays on love. What does love mean? Forgiveness. I talk about forgiveness and ego. I talk about spirituality in various ways, attachment, illusion, free will, what it means to say meant to be, destiny, and losing a child. I help a lot of people who've lost children, who've died, and gone to the other side. So I do a lot of work with parents and others who have lost loved ones, wives, husbands, partners, friends, siblings, etc. One thing that I want to point out to you um, in this book, this is the second book, Marcus Aurelius Updated, is and my daughter who's here designed the book cover for this one, and she designed the book cover for this one. Really nice job, Sam, my daughter. My daughter also is teaching meditation through my nonprofit. I taught both of my kids. My kids are both here, and I taught them when they were 4 or 5 years old to meditate. So they've been meditating almost their whole life. So yeah, so if anybody wants a better looking meditation teacher, you can contact my daughter. But one thing I want to point out that it's not publicly known except for these small audiences I've mentioned the following to. But if you look at the back of this cover here, and you can't see it probably too far away, but if you have this book, check it out. In the lower corner there, my daughter Sam, she overlaid three faces there. There's 3 heads there, and the one is really, really faint in the background. But the one in the front is a bust of Marcus Aurelius from a museum in Rome when he's 15 years old. It's not the usual Marcus Aurelius, picture that you normally see. So that was intentional. It was also intentional to put this approximately 15-year-old version of Marcus Aurelius on the cover, because that's when he really wanted to continue being a philosopher. He did not want to be leader of the Roman Empire, but and it ended up happening, as we know. So he was more in his philosopher stage of life, you could say. And in the middle picture there is a picture of Frederick the Great, Frederick II of Prussia. And the reason those 2 pictures are there, and the very light picture of somebody else in the background there, is because those are that person's different lifetimes of that same soul. And so one thing I want to give you also a heads up to, and that I know that a lot of people skip the beginning parts of books, but you should read the introduction in this book. Do not skip it and just go right to the essays. So that's a little clue for you. Again, introduction, what's in the introduction? I'll just tell you if you haven't read it. So it's a short 2-page summary of unusual, let's just call them unusual life points and personality traits and incidents that occurred in these 2 lifetimes. One is Marcus Aurelius, 2nd century Roman emperor, and the other is Frederick the Great of Prussia, who, quote, modeled his life after Marcus, unquote, 1,600 years later. So one wonders why, if you go to Sanssouci, the palace of Frederick the Great it's now outside near Berlin, but back then it was Prussia. Why at that palace does he have so many busts of Roman emperors and statues and so forth, as an 18th century Prussian king? Why did he, for example, I mentioned this in the introduction, just giving you kind of tidbits. Why did he, for example, have a small group of friends who would meet at one of his palaces that was called Rheinsberg? Rheinsberg was the actual name, very Germanic, makes sense, right? Except they renamed it Remusburg. Why did they do that with his friends? And why did some of them have Roman nicknames and so forth and called their castle Remusburg? For those of you who don't know the connection between Remus, Romulus and Remus, the legend that Romulus and Remus, two brothers, one killed the other one, and that's what so it's a legend, and that's why Rome was named after Romulus because he was the surviving brother. That's why it's called Rome. So I think Frederick, as a shout out to the brother who did not make it, called his palace Remusburg in honor of the brother who was killed by his brother Romulus. So, but all of these crossovers, you see, 1,600 years apart, is it proof? I don't think there's proof to any of this stuff. And I don't think that anybody who claims to have proof is really knows what real proof is. Proof to me is a mathematical proof. A theorem has a right and a wrong answer. To me, that's what proof means. But we can have evidence, and we can have more reliable evidence of these things about past lives and less reliable evidence. And we can look at things like third-party corroboration. Is there a third party that you don't, things that you didn't know, that you wouldn't otherwise know, that you haven't studied in your lifetime, as Sam Chin or Jesse Chin or Kelvin Chin or Sheba has never studied that and yet knows something about that period of time. It's very specific. For example, knows the language of Sumeria, where never studied anything about Sumerian before, that kind of thing. So I think there's evidence that we can look at and we can kind of make an educated guess that we feel pretty comfortable with the fact that that was an actual memory, right? But nothing is provable. So again, I look for, reliable evidence, as I said. So one thing I wanted to mention about this book, the Past Life book, and a lot of people, I don't know if I think it's good to point out, there's a timeline of my past lives here on page 260. It's like one of the last pages in the book. You flip to that first. I mean, you can look at the table of contents, obviously. But if you just want to see from 4000 BC, when I was a Sumerian businessman, to 1000 to 3000 BC, I had 3 or 4 lives as an Egyptian priest. I think I may have had an alien lifetime on another planet. I was a woman, another lifetime, Carthaginian slave, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was an eagle, another lifetime. And the eagle lifetime was interesting because it was in between human lifetimes. So, and it also, I remember during the eagle lifetime reflecting on being a Buddhist monk, because I was a Buddhist monk several lifetimes in different parts of Asia, Tibet, China, and so forth. And I remember when I was an eagle, self-reflecting about having been already a Buddhist monk and enjoying the solitude of being an eagle, soaring like I enjoyed the solitude of being a monk. So, and I was also a World War II fighter pilot right before this lifetime. So that's kind of an overview. We can open up the questions in a minute. I'm going to tell a story. I was with my daughter, and goes to the World War II fighter pilot one. a very unusual thing happened once. So my daughter went to San Francisco State University, and she was a dancer, dance major, and I flew in for all her performances. Didn't matter where I was living, what law firm I was working at, or corporate company I was working for, Austin, Texas, Washington, D.C., North Carolina. I lived a whole bunch of different places, but I would fly in to see my daughter. One day, I flew in and we went to pick up her boyfriend who was working, he was closing a swimming pool. And the kids had come and gone and so forth. It was a Friday night. And so we went to pick him up, and those of you know the Golden Gate Bridge. So you got the Golden Gate Bridge, and you got Golden Gate Park on one side, and you got Marin County on the other side, right? So right at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge on the Golden Gate Park side, you wind your way down this road and so forth, and it dead ends at this swimming pool. And I mentioned the name of the pool in the book, can't remember. It's a French name. But we pulled up there, and of course, he was already closing it down. There were no cars there. And so we were going to pick him up. Our car is the only car in the parking lot there. Everybody else had gone home. So he's closing the place up, and my daughter Sam goes in and whatever. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go walk out on that field over there. And it just looks really cool. And I thought, this is really unusual. It goes right up to the water, this big field, and it's almost like manicured. It's so totally flat, beautiful lawn, and it was a beautiful moonlit night, but there were not a lot of there's no streetlights or anything. It's just a dead end. And I thought, that's weird, how come there's not condos here, multi-gajillion dollar condos, lining this waterfront here. And so I stood out there in the middle of the field alone. I'm like 150, 200 feet out in the middle of this field. I had this really weird feeling. And it was a strange feeling. That's all I can describe it as, just an unusual feeling, and nothing more specific than that. And then I saw my daughter and boyfriend by the rental car. So I walked over and I said to him, I said, what's up with this? How come there's no condos here? Like, what's that? He said, oh, that used to be an old airfield. And I thought, whoa, hold on a second. So I walked back out into the middle of this field, and you can go there. Today, it's still there, but it's just a manicured lawn. I stood out in the middle of that manicured lawn that night, and I just got this hit. I call them hits. I just got flooded with these memories of flying in and out of that. I could see planes, single engine prop planes, from the 1920s and 1930s, flying in and out of this airfield there. And I knew that I had flown in and out of that airfield before. And then I went back to my hotel room and I looked it up. And it's just called Cressy. It's called Cressy Field, Cressy. You can look it up. And it was the main airfield on the west coast of the United States for the U.S. Army Air Corps until they built the Golden Gate Bridge, which was completed in 1933. And it became too much of an obstruction to kind of navigate around the Golden Gate Bridge to land and take off and everything. So they closed down the airfield in 1936. So another kind of example of external, like not knowing anything, and you go there and how do I know this? And you kind of get this unusual feeling, and then you look it up and it's like, whoa, it's an airfield. Wow, that's why I was feeling the way I was. And I'd flown in and out of there. So again, is that provable? No. But is it unusual? Yeah. So I got a ton of those experiences like that. Anyway, so yeah. Why don't we open up to questions? I can cover a whole bunch of other stuff. So people got questions? Go ahead. Yeah. The most fascinating thing I remember about being Marcus Aurelius, fascinating. What do we mean by fascinating? That you wouldn't know otherwise? That you wouldn't know otherwise. I would say that, well, I'll tell you what comes to mind first. It is known historically that my wife and I lost 9 children before they were 10 years old. Death, illness. I mean, child mortality was very, very, it was just, we had 6 children out of 15 pregnancies. So, I mean, that's just, my heart goes out to parents who've lost children. I guess another thing that maybe not as known, I mean, that is known, but I'm just emotionally still struck by it. I guess a thing that's not as known about him is how forgiving he was to others' mistakes. It may be why he's considered one of the quote unquote good emperors. You know how historians call them the good emperors and the others. He's one of the several good emperors. There were a lot of people I could have killed, including my wife, for, you could say, treason, literally. Yeah, and I didn't. Yeah. Yeah.
You hear stories about reincarnation, but usually the children that remember and the most vivid memory.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, were you a child when you started these memories, or were you a child? Why do you feel that you're able to remember so much when other people can't?
Yeah. So the question was, a lot of times you hear about children who remember their past lives, which kind of makes sense. They're more open, they're more receptive, etc. And they're closer to the other side too, right? They're only 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. I talk about that in this book. This one, I cite the University of Virginia Medical School. If you can check that out, go to the University of Virginia Medical School website and type in past lives in their search window, and you'll see they have 2,700 different cases of kids, and they're mostly 2 to 5 years old, like you said, okay? So the question also, you continued wondering, like, how come I can remember so much of my past life memories? And I've asked myself that same question. I'll tell you what I've come up with. But first he asked if I remembered anything when I was a child. And so I did not have past life memories when I was a child. But here's an unusual experience I had when I was a child that I did not remember, that I buried. And you'll see why I buried it when I tell you what happened. So my mom was born in China. She came over, she was 3 years old. My father's ancestors from China also, but he was born here like I was. I was born in Boston. So we would go see my mom's parents who lived in Chinatown in Boston, okay? And so I was the first grandchild out of 18 on that side and 45 on my father's side. A lot of cousins, right? Some I never even met on my father's side. But on 18 on that side, I was the first one. And so I'm saying that because when I came to see my grandparents, my mother, who was the eldest sibling of 8, had all these young sisters, right? They're in junior high and high school and so forth. So I don't know if you women remember what it was like when you were 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, but, loved playing with little kids and so forth. So my aunts, I was like the favorite toy, right? And so I would go and play and stay a weekend with my grandparents because they have all these built-in babysitters living there, right? My aunts. And I would play on the living room floor. And when I was a teenager, they told me that I used to play with all my invisible friends, my angel friends, and they had names, and I would talk to them and da 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 da. And you know what the reaction I had when I was a teenager and they told me that was I just was completely spontaneous. I got this welling up of anger and frustration in me towards my aunts because I knew that when they were kind of demeaning me when they would say, "Oh, Kel, look at he's playing with his friends over there again." And that's what I remember from when I was like 2 years old, is that looking down at me feeling, right? And so I buried that experience. So that doesn't address your specific question, but it tells you something about how open I was as a kid then, and then shut it down because they kind of made fun of me a little bit, right? So, but to answer your question about why I think my memories have opened up so much, I think number one is I don't have a fear of death. And I think a lot of people have remnants of it, even if you don't think you have a fear of death. There's like vestiges and so forth. And another big factor, I think, is humiliation. I don't have a fear of embarrassment. I'm not here to convince people that my memories are accurate. They're my memories. It's personal to me. I'm sharing. We were talking before, I just started sharing this with people in 2018. It's been going on with me since 1977. And I used to just talk to my friend George about it. We just talked. His memories opened up a few years before mine did. And we just talked with each other. We never thought we'd be talking about it. Now I'm teach seminars on it, like, but back then, it just, so very recent, just in the last 7 years, I've been public about this stuff, really. Um, so I think that's a big thing because a lot of us are carrying around, ooh, I don't want that. I don't want people to know about that. And I figured I don't care. I just put it out there in this book. I just put it out there raw, candid. This is what I remember. This is what I was experiencing. This is how I was. And, hopefully, I'm hoping this is myself talking to myself now. Hopefully, I've learned from these experiences over the 6,000 years of memories. I've learned something and I've improved myself over the all this time because it's not guaranteed. I have many, many examples of even some friends of mine who have not moved forward as smoothly, as progressively, I could say, consistently over the last couple thousand years that I've known them. And it's just not everybody is not everybody is wired the same way. And it's not a judgment about evolution. It's not a judgment about consciousness. It's not a judgment about any of that. We're all different. And we have to, like I said at the beginning, self-development. It's the word self is the important word there, right? And so I've learned, one big thing I've learned is to be more patient with myself and others. It's huge. I'm generally an impatient person. One of my personality traits, but it served me much better to be a little bit more patient and understanding and acceptant of others and others, you know, foibles, we'll call them. Does that help? Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
What was your alien life like?
Yeah, what was my alien life like? So, that's one. So I'll answer the question in a second, but let me just make a comment. I don't have the same degree and amount of memories of every lifetime, the same. It's like anything. It's like you think about your lifetime, this lifetime. Do you remember everything when you were in third grade? Or do you remember everything when you were, what happened 3 months ago or whatever? sometimes we have more memory of what we do in third grade than we do 2 weeks ago. It's just all over the map, right? And in this case, with the alien lifetime, I have a very, very clear memory of not a lot, but it's very clear. Um, and like my Crusader memory is like a lot. I have a lot of memories from that lifetime. I was in the Third Crusades and so forth. Um, that's around 1100, if you don't know it, 1100 AD. But the alien lifetime was very, very clear, and I was walking in an inland sea, and I could feel the water on my skin, and the feel of water on my skin did not feel the same way. I swim like twice a week. I'm in the water a lot. I do laps. I know what the water feels like, not just, water in the shower, of course, too. But I mean, I know what water in a body of water feels like on my skin as a human being. The water on my skin felt different. I don't know how else to describe it, but it was different. And I did not see myself, but I saw my friends who I was walking towards, and my vehicle was in the water, and I did not turn around in the experience to look and see the vehicle, but it was in the water. So I don't know if it was a flying craft or as a ship or whatever, but it was in the water, and I'm in about knee-deep water, walking towards the shoreline, and there's trees, and there was a beach, and it was forested, looked fairly Earth-like in terms of forestation and so forth. But the beings who were coming out to greet me, there were about 6 or 8 of them, something like that, in long white robes, and of course the bottom of their robes were getting wet as they walked towards me in the water. And it was the feeling, the emotion was very strong. It was like old friends, hadn't seen you in a long time. How you doing? And it was all mental telepathy, big eyes, no hair, no nose, and in a mouth, but the mouth not moving. The mouth was it looked like a functioning mouth, but it was all mental telepathy, communication. And there was a geodesic dome in the forest, set back from the beach a little bit, that we were going to go to. But that was my experience.
So they were humanoid like?
Yeah, yeah, but didn't look like us. No hair, and didn't look like me with no hair either. But yeah, 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 very friendly, loving. It was the vibe was very peaceful, and like getting together with old friends who love you again. Yeah.
Memories after you pass, like what?
Yeah. So do I have any memories of what happens after biological death? I call it, after we pass, after biological death. Notice that I call it biological death because it's our biology that's dying, our physical biological body. Because my experience is we still have a physical body on the other side, but not the same physical body, biological. So that's why I call it biological now, body that we have now, because a physicist would tell you that your light body is physical. I mean, it's measurable, it's definable, et cetera, in that sense, physical, not biological. So we still have a body on the other side that's a light body. And you can make yourself look like however you want to look. You can look like a child, you can look like you were 20 years old, you can look like you were 90 years old. It doesn't matter. You can change your appearance, how you appear to others, because you're a mind, you're conscious. So you'll hear me use the word mind a lot. So you could substitute spirit, soul, consciousness, awareness. To me, they're interchangeable. But it's because I teach in so many different countries, I try to use English that's easily understandable, because sometimes it's second, third language. English is their second, third, fourth language sometimes. So mind, consciousness continues, and we can do whatever we want there. I'm just hitting some bullet points. You can do whatever you want. People are not just sitting around doing nothing. I mean, you can do that, but a lot of people are there's some people who have kind of, they self-create jobs on the other side for themselves. Like I know at least two people recently, some children of clients of mine who've died, and they created jobs of helping young children who died biologically to transition. And they help. So I loosely use the term, there's a lot of spiritual and counselors and therapists, I'm not saying they have training, but I mean, they have a counseling role when we die. Not just your friends and your loved ones, but there are others who kind of taken on those roles. Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Question? Yeah, yeah.
When you're having these memories, you want memory one, brain go on.
Yeah, so Heidi was asking about the memory and how does the memory manifest and how is it kind of, I'm reframing what you said basically. How does the memory manifest? What's it feel like basically? What's it look like basically, right? So the bottom line is it varies. So I'll give you the lawyer answer. On the one hand, on the other hand, no, it varies. It's different at different times. Um, Sometimes it's a knowingness. Like you'll see when you read this book, I describe it. I answer your question with each memory as best I can, the way you just asked it, because I wanted to capture that, like how that memory came to me, in what form, what was I doing? Were my eyes closed? Were my eyes open? Was I in the shower? Was I meditating? Was I just lying down resting? Was I sleeping? Was I dreaming? What was I driving the car without the radio on? They've come to me in all those different situations. But sometimes they'll come as a knowingness. I just know something. I don't know why I know that. Why do I know that, for example, another example, Sam and I, when I was working at these law firms, I would fly in to see my kids because they were living here. And I'd work it out, some business reason to be in LA and I got to see my kids. So we were meditating together once, and in my meditation, I yelled out Saracens. I did not know what that was. Saracens. I didn't know it was a subject, or was it a noun, a verb, an adjective? I didn't know the word. And later I looked it up after we meditated. Sam reminded me that I yelled out Saracens. I looked it up. Turns out Saracens is the term for Muslims before around, I think, 1600 AD. I looked it up, so the story is in here, so whatever, I think it's 1600. I looked it up. After 1600 AD, we call them Muslims. Before that, they were called Saracens. So when I was in the Third Crusades, fighting Muslims, Saracens on behalf of the Pope, I was yelling Saracens. So it was that lifetime in accompanying that memory, Heidi, was I was wielding a two-handed sword on horseback, and I could feel the grit of the sand in my teeth. So those of you have ever been on horseback before in a field that's of dirt, the horses kick up a lot of dirt, right? So you can imagine what it's like in the desert of the Middle East on a 1,400-pound war horse. And I weighed about 350, 400 pounds then. I was huge in that lifetime. I was 6'5". So here's another answer to your question. I had this, first I had the memory in 1978 I'll tell you how that happened. I'll come back. But first, I'm going to answer your question. And then I'll come back and tell you how that memory popped up. But then maybe 10 years later or something, again, I wasn't writing the stuff down because I tell you guys, write it down now because you may want to know later. I didn't think I would want to know later, but I was about 10 years later, I knew I was 6'5", 230 pounds. 6'5", 230 pounds back then, when most men were about 5'5", 5'6". If you were tall if you were 5'8", okay, back then. And so I weighed 230 pounds. I outweighed them by over 100 pounds. My shoulders were huge. My arms were huge, right? And so I would just mow people down. So in battle. So I have all that memory, and I could feel the sand of little rocks. You ever been to the beach when it's blowing here in Santa Monica, and it's like, especially if you go like 3:30, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the wind picks up, right? And it blowing sand, and you get rocks in your teeth. I have that memory of rocks in my teeth, okay, along with the Saracens, along with the sword and all that. The way that memory popped up in 1978, I was in, so you remember Lillian Rosen? I'm just going to mention her name. So Heidi knows who Lillian was. I had met with Lillian, and a number of people had met with Lillian in Chicago. So I was in the Midwest at the time. And I had just finished a group meditation with a group of friends, some informal group meditation, just a bunch of friends at somebody's parents' living room. We sat and meditated. And I was lying down resting afterwards. By this is a tip for all of these, many of you who raise your hand as meditating. If you don't rest, if your teacher didn't tell you to rest after you meditate before you get up, that's a mistake. You need to rest afterwards. Just lie there, sit there before you get up after you meditate. You don't just automatically get up after you finish meditation. You need a transition. So we were doing that. And in that experience, while I was lying there resting, it was like a TV screen went on in my mind. And I saw, you know how you ever have a dream where you can see things in your dream, but you can't see yourself, right? Because you're looking through your own mind's eye, so to speak. And I'm walking into this big, huge stone room, and I'm looking at the floor, and it's like 2 foot by 3 foot stone blocks, floor, wall, ceiling. It's about 30, 40 feet high ceiling, and it's nobody in there. I'm alone. I walk into this empty room, meaning all the furniture had been pushed to the walls of the room, except there's one piece of furniture in the middle of the room, and it's a full-length mirror. And I walk up to the full-length mirror, and I see myself. This is the only time I think I've ever seen myself in an experience like this before, whether in dreams or anything. And I saw myself, and I filled up the whole mirror. I was huge, okay? And I was wearing a white tunic with a cross, and I had full-length chainmail on from head to toe. And I had red hair and a red beard. So you couple that with knowing that I was in the Crusades and that I was typically at the phalanx, you know what that is in battle? That means I'm the tip of the spear. So I'm the leader at the right. I was known to be the first into battle with my troops. And of course, that's why the troops loved me, because I was risking myself, just like I was asking them to. And so I had that memory already. I had this red hair crusader look memory already. And then 10 years later, I got the 6'5", 230-pound memory. So Heidi, that's like all different pieces come together. And I realized there was only one person who was that big, 6'5", 230, leading crusades, and had red hair, because not that many people have red hair. It was Richard. So, and ironically, I I never got killed in battle. I got wounded a lot. Never got killed in battle. And I got killed by being careless. I went out one night just to kind of, we were, there was a siege that we were doing on this small, relatively meaningless castle in France. And this was after the Crusades. And I went out at around 9 o'clock at night, and I didn't put my chainmail shirt on, anything. I just thought, I'm going to go out, get some fresh air. And there's this 14-year-old kid who used to, every night during the whole siege for weeks, he would just shoot crossbow bolts into the dirt in front of us, our encampment. He was just an annoying little kid. And I went out and he hit me in the shoulder. And this is another personality trait that I have, is stubbornness. So I stubbornly didn't just have my surgeon surgically remove it carefully. I was annoyed and pissed off at myself for not having my nightshirt on. And I ripped it out and I caused more damage. And I died of, which a lot of battlefield deaths because of infection. So I got sepsis and died 2 weeks later. So I don't know how many hundreds of battles that I was in, and never was killed, even though I was right there in the midst of everything. So, yeah. Anything else? Other questions? Yeah.
So back to like afterlife,
Yes.
have an experience where guys came together and briefed you on your life and determined what family you need to come back into in order to learn certain lessons and be back to.
Yeah. So the question is, have I ever had afterlife experience where guides come together and give some guidance into moving forward into another lifetime to help basically work things out, right? So the short answer is sort of. I have a lot of guides. I have a lot of friends on the other side. A lot of them are my former soldiers, thousands of them who I've been in battle with. Because I have this unusual trait, I guess, of not being a general who just stands up on the hill and directs things. So, but yeah, I've had lots of guidance from friends on the other side, and I still do. And I get I call them whisperings. And I also have had my own memory of seeing, like, this happened to me when I was swimming in Hawthorne. I swim at the Hawthorne City Pool. And I was swimming. This was the beginning of the year that I wrote this, I think it was the beginning of 2023, so fairly recently. And I was in the middle of writing this book. And I had this memory while I was swimming laps. You know, sometimes if you ever swim laps or you run long distance or you cycle or whatever, you kind of get into a kind of a meditative mode-ish kind of thing. It's automatic, right? I know what to do. So I'm not thinking so much about my strokes that I'm doing. I'm just in the moment. And I got this vision of myself looking down at Earth in the 1900s, the teens of the end of the First World War. And something made me think that there was going to be a huge war coming later. And I came down just in case to be part of that. And I was a fighter pilot in the Second World War, flying off aircraft carriers. I flew F-4F Wildcats off the Enterprise and other aircraft carriers in the South Pacific. I was blonde, blue eyes, recently married and then killed. Anyway, so like a lot of servicemen back then, right? But I I remember on the other side seeing, um, and it was, I figured it out that it was long before the Treaty of Versailles. Those of you who know anything about World War I history, the Treaty of Versailles was a terrible, I mean, it really put Germany in economic and starvation mode, basically. And there are many historians who argued that the Treaty of Versailles actually was a big factor in creating World War II and in an environment for Hitler to become, who he was. But who he was is who he was, but to express it in the way that he ended up expressing it. Um, but it wasn't that. I saw something 6 months earlier. I saw it was something to do with Russia. So when I'm swimming, I'm having this experience, but I'm not having all the data in terms of history. I'm just getting this notion to your question, Heidi. I'm getting this feeling about something. I'm on the other side. I can see myself looking down at Earth, and I'm getting some feelings about Russia and Germany and something. It's like Russia and Germany and Russia and Germany. And there's something not right here, right? And so then I go look it up. And then I research that, okay? So this is a tip for you guys if you're curious about these things. You get these little inklings, little tidbits. I call them breadcrumbs. Then you follow the breadcrumb. So I followed the breadcrumb and I looked it up, and sure enough, Russia had surrendered to Germany. I did not know this. Russia surrendered to Germany in the fall before Germany surrendered to the Allies, in whenever it was June or something or whatever. Okay, Russia had surrendered and had given up like I cited it in this book. We'd given up like a third of its revenues, of its growth, the national revenues. They were like huge amounts, millions of people, and so forth, et cetera, were impacted, et cetera, Russians. Okay, and I thought they're not going to stand for this. That's going to come back and it's going to bite somebody, right? And it's going to bite Germany. And then I came in. So that was something from in between where I made a strategic decision. I wasn't based on prescience that I knew, but it was based on information that I had sensed. But I think now that I know my past life memories, that I had so much experience fighting Russia when I was Prussian. There's a lot of Prussian-Russian battles and politics, et cetera, et cetera. So I think my knowledge of 18th century Russia through my Prussian lens informed me about what Russia would do to Germany because of what Germany did to Russia in the First World War to make Russia surrender before Germany ended up surrendering. All of that I didn't know. But I had that, those are examples, right? I followed, yeah.
So I believe that it's a little unclear. There's many lives, many stars and armies. So what advice do you have here if we want to try to remember our life? We call it breadcrumb. What can we do? We're not mediums. What can we do to try to remember? You talk about swimming. That makes a lot of sense. Such a release. What can we do?
So the question is, what can people do to increase their likelihood of remembering their own past lives? Right? In a nutshell, right? So first of all, there's a threshold question that you need to ask yourself first, which is, do I want to remember my past life memories? Do I want to remember everything about my past life memories? Okay. So, and I say this seriously because it might sound cool to you, some of the stuff that I've said, but some of it's really painful, right? And so you have to honor yourself. That's why I keep coming back to it. Remember, I started the whole thing about self-development. It's your journey. So, but it's a question. I'm not telling you not to explore your past lives. I'm saying this is an issue. So, those of you who have been to law school, it's about issue spotting, okay? I'm spotting an issue for you. You got to decide what to do with that issue, okay? But that's issue number one. That's threshold issue number one. Do I want to explore that? And the second related issue is, am I ready to? So, the good news is, I don't think you absolutely have to figure out the hard and fast answer to the second question, because I think that we have built into ourselves a self-regulatory screening mechanism that prevents us from remembering stuff that's going to be too overloading for us. Okay? So again, I'm not against past life regressions. I've never had one. I've never needed to have one, obviously. But I'm not against it, but I'm cautionary with my clients who ask me if they should go get past life regressed or whatever. Okay. If they're the type of person who I already know has a lot of fears, I tell them not to. Right? But again, that's between you and yourself. You got to decide that. Okay. But those are important issues. Okay. Now, so what you can do, okay, to answer your question, one thing that I think that is, there's several things, but the first thing is, what can you do on your own? You can meditate. And then you want to learn a meditation technique that's easy and effortless and that expands your conscious capacity. So, is that the tsunami?
So there was some time. So after midnight.
After midnight, yeah.
Plenty of time to live
Yeah,
with the present.
yes. Yes, for those of you who don't know, we're on Facebook Live right now. There's almost a 9-point earthquake. It's like 8.887 in Russia. So the alarms are going off here in California, telling us there's a tsunami alert around midnight. But we're going to see what happens in Hawaii first. So before this talk tonight, some friends of mine who are on the Zoom call right now in the Facebook Live contacted some of our friends in Hawaii. So we'll know more specifics when we see what happens in Hawaii. But that's a big earthquake, yeah.
I recently joined the first Kelvin, I'm looking at this list for projects.
Yeah,
And they look, most of them look for me like an instruments or sources or
hmm
awakening, self-development, and these things. My question for you is, from your perspective, these instruments should be used for the sake of what? Except these things which I mentioned, like awakening or healing or self-development, they are good enough by themselves as tasks. But to do, I haven't read the book, sorry, probably if I would have the answer. But I'm in this path, like, is it for self-realization, finding your dream, exploring your life purpose? I'm bringing this. I don't know the way.
yeah,
The reason I'm asking, this is a logical question. I understand on the other side, I'm a long time student of Kabbalah. And from this perspective, it will all be serving for doing the tikkun, for your soul correction purpose. I mean, basically the reason why you came here. And because apparently this question was in my mind since I was a couple of days, since I was born, I would always ask the question, why are we here? For Kabbalah gave me a lot of answers, or maybe one, which covers a lot of areas. But I wonder the way it looks from your perspective, all these beautiful tools, resources, and instruments are supposed to lead us where?
So the question is, where is all this supposed to lead us? And in my opinion, it's really unique to each individual. And I don't think there's one answer to this. But to me, if I give you one general answer, I say is to know more about who I am. It's the know thyself issue. What can I know more about myself? For what purpose? So that I can navigate my life in the present, in what I call the continual present, better. And so you could say, so I can live my life with more contentment and inner peace. If I had to summarize and give you one thing, that's what I would say. For me, that's the way I look at it. Okay. So there's different paths, like you say, the Kabbalah, the this, the that. People have all different ways. I'm not saying you have to do it this way or this way or that way, but I'm saying that that's to me the overall, right? Why? What's going to make me happier, more contented, more at peace with living in my continual present? People talk a lot, Eckhart Tolle talks about living in the present, so forth, so on. You don't think about living in the present and that's not being in the present, okay? Being in the present it's a spontaneous act. I am in the present all the time. We all are. It's like you're by default you are, right? So that's why I call it the continual present, because it's always changing. Oh, it's not that what I just said is not present anymore. So it's like we're always in the continual present. To me, that's the purpose of everything that I'm talking about, the way I look at it through my lens, right? That's what you're asking? Does it help? What's that?
I was expecting this answer because it's pretty said that it was a great function in the present. That's clear. But my feeling is that being in this state, if you manage to achieve it, should lead you to something bigger, like affecting something bigger, making more people happier, or as I said, fulfilling your purpose, your sole purpose, which was probably was not so successful or implemented the previous lifetimes. And that includes mostly for incarnate the past lives. So knowing your past lives, again, in my perspective, it's exactly to figure out what was not done, which is going to be, which the stuff left from the past incarnations, or this lifetime to pursue.
So from my perspective, I don't view myself in the way that you're describing. So I view myself as a continuum that's continuing to choose. That's what free will means. Again, I'm using free will not in the religious, ethical way. I'm using free will just to mean choice. So my free will choice is to move forward in a continuum that, again, you cannot experience eternity by definition, but my logic tells me, and my experience seems to lead me to believe that my soul is eternal. That means I have plenty of time to figure stuff out. That means I have no concerns about what has happened in the past and trying to right wrongs that were in the past and this and that. Now, do I do that sometimes? Sure. But I don't have any concern. I don't have any fear about that, or I don't feel like there's a duty, if that word makes sense, like dharma, if you know what dharma is. I think that those notions have created, I'll just say it, I mean, I think some of those notions have unintentionally created suffering in the world. And so I think that we can live our lives with more grace and by looking at life as a continuum and doing better and better as we choose. That's the way I look at it. So I don't look at it as like there's some accounting book that I have to somehow get the debits and credits right on, if that makes sense. All right. So I'm continually moving forward, making choices, and hopefully making better choices that are more in balance for myself and others around me. That's the way I was looking at it. I don't know if that helps. Well, I wanted to finish one question, and then I got a couple of questions. Finish your question. So meditation, as I said, is crucial because expanding the conscious capacity of your mind is what's going to increase the likelihood that you open yourself up to more of yourself, right? With less fear, because fear is what's going to cramp and limit your experiences if you want to expand your experiences and increase your memories of your past lives, even stuff that may be painful, right? If you're okay with that, then you're going to be more okay with that if you have less fear and less stress, right? And more expansion of the conscious capacity of the mind, not intellectually, but experientially. I hope that helps. Yeah. Yeah.
Several different forms of meditation, and I should treat that, like you say, about effortless form. But I know your daughter teaches that. Would you be interested in like having a session here, or having a shepherd here, or teaching those people that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's what we do now. So that's, like I have clients, we have clients in 70 countries now. So yeah, so with here, we could do one, could figure out a place and do it in person. And it's unusual for me to actually meet my students. Every once in a while, I do meet my students, but most of them, I see them on Zoom. So yeah, so most of my 99% of my students, I never even meet in person. But short answer is yes, we could. It's a 4-day class. It's a 4-day class, and we could figure that out. So forth. But Sam, did you have something?
There's some discussions that you and I had before about what we're calling our memories does for us. Yeah, to answer also, I mean, to kind of help with answering the question that you sent to me before, where in the line of knowing yourself and how it helps you being in the present moment, is you've shared with me that the more that we understand ourselves, it's easier for us to navigate this life, right? Because you understand certain behavioral traits and ways that you think or respond to people or process things. And in a couple of ways that helps you with connecting with other people in this life, because you have less debris to sort through. So you have clarity of who you are. And it's all about enriching your life, like your own life, not in terms of how we connect with other people, which is something very special to being in a physical body. And I think also you've shared with me that when you know yourself, it's easier for you to listen to the things that resonate with you deeply. And that is another way of just being happier. It's how to find happiness. There's a lot of what you teach and how you help people is to figure out how to make yourself as happy as you can, because that's a singular experience that only you can figure out. But yeah, that was just coming to mind because I've had the luckiness of having so many conversations and Q&As with him my whole life about all these experiences. So I had just remembered some conversations about that.
That's all with the work you're saying is that
Yes. Yeah.
So you explained that you had some rememberings while you were. So you explained that you had some rememberings while you were swimming. Potentially you were in a flow state in that case. And you also talked about meditation and various ways of meditating. And I see them as more like tools to connect to the source or to remember. And for me, it's meditation, flow state, or pure and simply boredom. And I was wondering if you, through your journey, if you found additional instruments where you can harness or tune in and receive, be it right or wrong, but being able to connect to whatever it is, be it past lives, be it creativity, be it receiving knowledge in whatever shape or form.
Yeah, I I guess I would just say I pay attention to trying to be as balanced as I can in with all the factors that you raise, whether it's meditation, sleeping, eating what I eat, you know, just all of those things are factors. And I just try to make my physical, biological body as healthy as possible as well, because they all influence each other, So really, that's it. I mean, there's no magic bullet here. And I'm not saying in anything that may be new to anybody, but it's putting it into practice. And some people call that discipline. To me, people will tell me that I'm very disciplined. To me, it's just normal. It's
Fine.
just part of life. It's just the way I live my life. And it's a choice, right? And so I don't judge people who don't, but that's what's worked for me anyway. Yeah.
Also, just one comment, and this is just like an idea. Maybe you could elaborate on that, right? Because sometimes we have this wrong beliefs or notion that this might sound a little bit pessimistic or so, that we're here to achieve something and grandiose and so on. And, my past life, I'm here to do this and that. And, sometimes I wonder, maybe not. Maybe you're just a regular human being, and that's totally fine in this life. And, not putting the pressure on yourself, so, and it's like, yeah, maybe you're just like a side cast today, and that's totally fine. And not to like overburden yourself with expectations and so on, because it kind of like inclines that your ego might be talking rather than your true self and your journey of finding that.
No, that's a really good point. And in fact, I talk about this. I don't use those words, but if you read this, you'll see in some of my Buddhist monk lifetimes, I just wanted to be alone, just chill out. I wanted to, I get fed, I have a roof over my head, and I want to come back to planet Earth, and I don't have any big plans, and I just wanted to chill out in a biological body, though. Because to your points about the other side, sometimes I think people get bored, and people think, well, why do they come back? Why would I come back here? First of all, to your point, I think it's a valid, very important point to underscore, which is not everybody has a plan. I mean, you walk around, think you go to Ralph's supermarket, go to Costco or whatever, Walmart, whatever, you go through the aisles, and you tell me you're looking at 8 billion people are walking around having a plan. Most people are very, very opportunistic. And then again, that's not a judgment statement. That's the statement of fact. They just are opportunistic. Oh, well, this happened and I got this job and then I ended up being in that job for the next 40 years. It's just, that's the way most people live their lives. Now, maybe not those of you here, but you got to remember, you cannot project who you are onto other people. Everybody is unique, everybody's different, and most people are not planning stuff out. They just aren't. Now, could they be have planned it out and forgotten? Absolutely. I think that happens with most people, even if they did plan it out. But no, and I think that some people come back, and I told one of my students, she really loves soft serve ice cream. And I said, Tasha, maybe you just came back for the soft serve ice cream, it's like, okay, it's not a judgment it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You can't have soft serve ice cream on the other side. I mean, you can make it up in your mind because you are a mind and you can create anything in your mind, but it doesn't taste the same if you don't have a tongue that's on it. So, I think one significant reason that I have observed being on the other side, and I don't have to have an NDE to be on the other side. I had an NDE. We didn't talk about it. I almost drowned off of San Diego, but when I was 21 years old. But I don't have to have an NDE to be on the other side. And I can see there's many who come back just because they've been on vacation for 1,000 years on the other side. And they're like, man, I want to get back to Earth. I want to get back in a biological body. How many of you have been on vacation and after a week or 2 weeks, you kind of like, I don't love my job, but I want to get back to work. And so imagine that for 1,000 years or 500 years on the other side. It's vacation. It's like anything you want, whatever you want to do. Da, 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 da. It's like, so I think that's a significant reason why people come back, and they may not even come back with a plan
Yeah.
other than, I want the soft serve.
And also like, and also just a point that you just mentioned about like being in peace, being in, meditating, having enough fluids and just being in bliss and just be content your whole life. And I think that might be also a novel approach about life, but also life is meant to be lived and to find your challenges, to find your purpose and essentially setting goals in that case, right?
Yes.
Well, the meditative state is awesome and so on. You're no good to anyone and to your fellow human beings just meditating and being content all day long.
Well, not only that, but we're in biological bodies, so let's do biological stuff in the biological body, because you ain't gonna have the biological body forever.
Yeah.
It's gonna give out. It's a machine. We know that, right? And I help people transition, loved ones, friends, so forth, transition. And so I've been at the deathbed of many, many, many people. And, we don't want to, you don't want to have it be there with regrets. Like, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. No, go out and do it. You get a biological body, use it. Now, I'm not saying you got to go, whatever it's called with the wings and so forth, flying down the Swiss Alps, but, use your biological body while you're in a biological body and enjoy it. So I'm not a proponent, you can infer from that, I'm not a proponent of a lot of spiritual teachers out there who say, you should divorce yourself from the physical and no. No, you chose to be in the physical biological body here. What's the point? Yeah. So again, these are choices. I encourage people to take advantage of being in a biological body while you're in it, to whatever degree you want to. Yeah. Yes. Jay, you got something, Jay? You have a question? Oh, same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
There's an interesting saying in Judaism that when you get up there, you judge the pleasures that you didn't experience. You have, as you said, well, this is the ultimate experience pleasure, not in the animalistic. It starts with animalistic, but you should open and going forward and getting higher and higher, but you should enjoy.
Yeah.
life. That's part of why we are here.
Yes, enjoying life in whatever way, as long as not hurting others is the way I look at it. So to me, that's my filter. And that again, I'm not proselytizing to other people, but that's my filter, is to do it and enjoy in the kindest way as possible, right? Without hurting others. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else? So hopefully you filled out that form, the tip sheet, and leave that behind so we can collect those, the list of suggested topics, that thing there. Did you have one? Yeah. Val? So some people need a copy, Shiva? Some people need copies of that. Yeah. And then, anybody have an extra one? You give them, maybe, does anybody else need one? Maybe they're okay. You have a question? Oh, you need a form. Yeah, we'll get one. Shiva will get some. Yeah. Yeah, you have a question?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, and I should have probably done my research, but to what degree does Stoicism talk about afterlife and
That's who? Stoicism talk about afterlife.
Yeah. Because
Not,
the philosophy is slightly different.
it is different. Yeah, Stoicism doesn't get into it too much, so it's not, yeah. It's more living here now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how to live here now, right? And, this is an example of, I'll talk about fate and so forth.
Yeah.
But in this book, I talk about that in the beginning of this book, the Marcus Aurelius updated book. I talk about some of my favorite Marcus Aurelius maxims. So do people know that Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, you know that book, you've heard of it, it's a pretty famous book, right? Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. You know that that's not a book that he wrote, right? It's just his collection of self ruminations and thinking that he wrote on a daily basis or almost on a daily basis. And for a decade or more, 14 years or something, they're not exactly sure. But and it was collected in around 800 AD. And then somebody started publishing it when the Gutenberg press came out, 1400s. And then somebody named it, I think, in the 1700s, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. But he never meant it to be public. It's very personal stuff. So it's actually a really interesting view into how he thought in a really candid way, because he didn't expect this to be public.
Yeah.
It was just between himself and himself. And if you read some of the maxims in that book, and you read some of my ideas in here, you'll see parallels. And there's something that I've said my whole life, this lifetime: control what you control and let go of what you can. And he said that a million times too. So, yeah, and I didn't know that before I had the memory. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. It's been great. Great having everybody. It's great. Yeah. Yeah.